Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Costin. I am the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity. And today we have a panel of folks, which I'll introduce to you in a second. But the topic of today is to talk about fixing Illinois' Tier 2 pensions. Do they even need to be fixed? With me today, I've got Bryce Hill from the Illinois Policy Institute, and he's the Director of Fiscal and Economic Analysis. And Illinois Policy Institute, of course, is a strong voice for taxpayers in the state of Illinois. They've got a great social media presence. I used to work for Illinois Policy Institute for 5 years, a long time ago, almost a decade ago now. So I'm very fond of what's going on at Illinois Policy Institute. And we also have Ted Dabrowski, who is the president of Wirepoints, which is an independent nonprofit company delivering a lot of really interesting original research and commentary about what's going on here in Illinois with the economy, state government. So I'm so pleased that both of you could join us. Thank you very much, Bryce and Ted, for joining us today.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Ted, wanted to jump in with you talking about the pension situation. Can you share with us some of the research that you guys have done in regards to the situation in Illinois, in regards to pensions and the impacts on the people of Illinois?
Well, sure. And I'll do that with a few slides. I think I've got 5 slides. So let me just share these up here, um, assuming that I can be functional with it. So, we're talking about pensions and is that screen clear for you guys?
It's it.
Okay, great. So we've got a big problem. Our Illinois politicians want to increase pensions in Springfield now. They're talking about it. There's a few bills, and Bryce is going to cover some of that. But there's a few bills out there, one more time increasing pension benefits. And ordinary everyday Illinoisans, most of them don't have a pension. Most of them work, have something maybe coming from Social Security. Maybe they have a 401k plan, but they have no guaranteed pension like our government workers do. And we're going to discuss why it makes no sense to increase pensions. But before we do that, I just want to show you just what a national outlier Illinois is already in pensions. And so this first chart I have, and you can love pensions, you can love government workers all you want, but you need to know that no state is burdened with pension debt like Illinois is. This is done by Fitch, the rating agency, and they calculate the state level pension debts, the shortfalls in the pensions that each state has. And you'll see here we got all 50 states laid out. And what stands out, which is stand out like a sore thumb, is that Illinois has the biggest pension debts in the country. Fitch puts it at 172 billion. And you can the other states that are in green are our neighboring states. You can see how much less in debt they have. They're not burdened by pension debt, so they can have lower taxes. They can have more money to spend on government. We're already struggling with these massive debts, and some of that is chasing away Illinoisans. And we can come back to this in a little bit later. Another important point to make is that it's not just the state pension debt. Chicago has its own pension crisis, the biggest biggest crisis of all the big cities. We have local pension debts. We have state retiree health care debt. In all, it's about $240 billion spread out over Illinois' 5 million households. That's about $50,000 of debt per household that they're going to come after us for taxes at some point. And the problem isn't that we don't like pensions for government workers and all that. The real issue is that just they're very, very generous. And if you look at recently retired teachers who are retiring in the last 3 years, who work a full career, the average pension for a teacher is almost $80,000. They get to retire when they're age 59, and the total payout they'll get over their retired lifetime will be about $2.6 million. Now, this isn't the teacher's fault. This is what's been negotiated with the government. So it's really the lawmakers who are responsible for all this. But it shows you just how rich those pensions are and how early government workers can retire when ordinary everyday Illinoisans have to work into their 60s, some into their 70s. So this is why these things are so expensive. And of course, what happens to Illinoisans, everyday Illinoisans? Because we have these massive debts and we have to pay them at the local level, at the state level, we end up with the highest property taxes in the country. Again, this graphic shows all 50 states. It shows the property tax rate that we're paying on average in Illinois, 1.88%. And it is, two times, even more than two times more than what they're paying in Indiana or Kentucky. We're paying some of the highest property taxes, and this is squeezing people out. So I wanted to share these slides just as an intro because that's the environment we're in as we talk about whether pensions should be increased by lawmakers, and just how burdened we already are in Illinois to try to pay down the old debts, forget about paying new pension obligations. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but we have a real problem, and I think the bottom line would be is that our lawmakers should not be raising any taxes, sorry, any pension benefits because at a minimum because we can't afford it anymore.
Well, thank you, Ted. That's some really interesting information there. Point out that the pension benefits that are received by folks are far in excess of what is given to people underneath Social Security. So much, much sweeter, I guess is the way to say it. And it's a big problem. And so, but it's not just that this is a problem with the past. Obviously, we've got the legislature that is in session right now. We have a little over a week before their scheduled adjournment at the end of May 31st. And Bryce is going to give us an update about what's going on right now. What are the new developments with pensions, including some new proposals to sweeten pensions, particularly tier two?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, it's not just a historical problem. To piggyback off of what Ted was saying earlier, um, pension debt, that number keeps on rising year after year. We allegedly have a funding plan that's supposed to be paying down these obligations, but it's not. We're at nearing all-time highs for state level pension debt. And since we established the plan, the Edgar funding ramp, as it's been called, um, pension debt across the state has grown by $126 billion. So most of our pension debt that we're currently grappling with was created after a dedicated funding source and system was created, and that's a figure that grows every single year. So we can't even pay for the current benefits that are being offered, let alone begin to consider or entertain the idea of increasing pension benefits, which is currently being done in Springfield. So there's a few separate pieces of legislation that are floating out there, but the provisions that are being considered include things like reducing the retirement age. So currently, as Ted pointed out, tier one members, your older state workers can retire before age 60 or around age 60. That in the tier two system, which was implemented in 2011 as a way for the state to help curb that growth in unfunded pension liabilities, created a new retirement age of 67. It also did things like offer less generous cost of living adjustments, and things of that nature. It expanded the window for how we calculate final average salary that ultimately pension payments are based on. And all these things have been positive for the state's pension liabilities in terms of the debt that we're grappling with is all associated with the older legacy workers hired in 2010 or before, or at least as of right now. That could change in the future because we have defined benefit plans, which guarantee a certain level of benefits regardless of things like market returns or investments and what the state contributes. But so far, they're a positive for the state's pension debt, and they will, absent any changes, continue to be so, hopefully. But right now, we're seeing legislation being pushed that would increase the benefits. So offer a lower retirement age, offer higher cost of living adjustments, um, allow for a narrower window for calculating final average salary, and increase the amount of your salary that can be applied towards your pension. So all in all, these benefits increases are going to add somewhere in the neighborhood of $76 billion in additional contributions required from the state. It's going to increase that figure that we saw at the very beginning, that $175 billion in state pension debt. That number is going to increase with these new benefits that aren't funded. So down the road, we could be seeing an even much larger tax hike because of increased pension benefits through the tier two system that are being floated in Springfield right now. And the reason why this is being considered, or allegedly is being considered, is because there are some potential issues that the public sector unions and members of the pension systems themselves claim that tier two pensions run afoul of some federal requirements that could possibly be needing reforms, but we currently don't have an understanding of if or when that is going to happen. And I won't get too far into the details here right now, but that's something I'm sure we'll discuss here momentarily.
Yeah, Bryce, thank you. And so Ted kind of outlined how we are an extreme outlier in regards to taxes. We're an extreme outlier in regards to bond rating. And we have an exodus of people in the state of Illinois to other states. But Bryce, how insane is this situation? We have all those liabilities, one of the things that I always point to is like we have the highest property taxes and the highest combined state and local taxes according to Wallet Hub. But at the same time, we have maybe the worst funded pension or the most pension debt in the country. Like, how are these things even possible? But at the same time, we're proposing a number of legislators in the General Assembly to add another, would you say, $76 billion of additional obligations? Like, how insane is that situation?
Yes, it's a fundamental mismatch from what we have in reality here in the state of Illinois. So, our current pension obligations, the state spends nearly $12 billion annually out of the state's budget. So, about 20% of the state's budget is going to pay for pensions. So, those high taxes that we're talking about, the high state and local tax burden, that money is not going to fund current services largely. It's going to pay for pension debt. That doesn't count other types of debts or bond servicing, but purely the pension debt is eating up about 20% of the state's budget. So nearly $12 billion. But the reason why this problem keeps growing is because of how generous those benefits are. So I mentioned that the state has added about $126 billion in unfunded pension liabilities since we have created the quote unquote funding plan for paying down this debt. Um, the vast majority of that, over $76 billion, has been due to the explosion in benefits because they grow compounded at 3% annually every single year. So even if the state were paying what actuaries would consider a full actuarially determined contribution, the amount that on paper, doing all the calculations and making reasonable assumptions is needed to be paid, those benefits still would have grown tremendously because things like employee salaries, things like missed investment returns, and then ultimately a compounding 3% cost of living adjustment and people living longer into the future has really exploded those costs and made them completely unaffordable because there's no good way, honestly, to plan for paying something that is that generous and is in a defined benefit structure. So it's not like your traditional 401k where you put money in and your employer might contribute, and then you get whatever your market returns are. And when you come to retirement age, you have this big balance that you can then begin to withdraw from. But that's all subject to whatever happens in the markets and your investments. It's not like that in the state of Illinois. You get a guaranteed paycheck in perpetuity, basically, that regardless of what you've paid in, regardless of what the state has paid in, and what the investment returns on that money have been, uh, it's fundamentally guaranteed by taxpayers in the state's constitution. So those generous benefits and our lack of funding being able to keep up with the rapid growth is why we're such an outlier in the pension crisis.
Now, Ted, you in your slides, you mentioned like this is not just a state of Illinois issue with the General Assembly, but this is also something that impacts places like Chicago, which has one of the worst bond ratings as well in the nation for any big city. Um, as you see proposals in Springfield that are potentially going to make the situation worse or much worse, what do you think that that bodes for the future of the state of Illinois and big cities like Chicago?
Yeah, so you mentioned Chicago being impacted, but it's not just like you said, Chicago. It's Danville, it's Peoria, it's all the cities across the state. What typically happens in Illinois when they negotiate new pension benefits is they might give them to the state workers first, but then if it doesn't go for all government workers in Illinois, it will soon thereafter. And so you can imagine if they lower the retirement ages, increase the COLAs, make the calculations more beneficial for workers, that's going to cost a lot more for the state and therefore for state taxpayers. But then they'll pass the same thing for Chicago, for police, for fire, for teachers. They'll do the same thing for the local funds throughout the state, and they'll do the same thing for IMRF, the municipal workers. So count on it to go to everyone, and it will, of course, increase property tax bills everywhere when it hits the locals. And if I can make just one fundamental issue, and Bryce was touching on it, the real issue here is that we have a state where our government workers are protected by the Constitution. They have constitutional protections for their pensions. They get long-term contracts. They get guaranteed raises. They have Amendment 1, that workers' rights amendment that was passed that protects government workers. So our government workers are being, they're being treated as very special in Illinois. And the problem is that the second class of workers, the everyday Illinois who don't have guaranteed pensions and all that stuff, they have to keep paying more and more. They have to keep sacrificing their standard of living to keep paying for these super duper pensions. And that's the real problem. We have two classes of workers in Illinois, one protected and the other one who has to pay for the other one. That's not going to work. And that this any increase in the tier two just makes that situation worse.
Absolutely. And I think this might be a good time to kind of let people know there's things that you can do. Obviously, we very much encourage people to contact their legislators, say, we're taxed enough already. We have the highest property taxes, highest overall state taxes, worst bond rating in the country. And we don't really, it would be very detrimental to the state to sweeten these pensions even more and create an even bigger divide between what I call the political class versus the citizen class. So contact your legislators, call them up on the phone, tell them that this is an important issue to you. We really need to put the pressure on because we have a few weeks left here in session. But Bryce, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on what might be next in regards to this? Is something could happen in the next 9 or 10 days? You seeing anything in regards to special sessions in the future? What do you think the prospects and chances are for something like this passing?
Yeah, I think there's the high possibility of something like that happening, some potential changes to uh, the benefit structure and tier two pensions specifically. In Governor Pritzker's budget address back in February, he included a partial change, something matching the tier two salary cap to the Social Security wage base, the amount of wages that Social Security benefits are based on. So he included that change in his budget proposal. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot of detail about the budget that is likely going to be passed here in the next 10 or so days, but something like that very likely could be included. There have also been, like we've discussed, several bills that have been introduced, one this spring, one last November during veto sessions. So this is something that's actively being considered and debated. And so we're definitely going to be very vigilant about anything that appears to have legs in Springfield. The other underhanded tactic of this is, we might not get a whole lot of notice. There might not be there could be reading requirements that are waived. There could be what's known as gut and replace, which is you take essentially a shell of a piece of legislation and completely swap it out for some new legislation that could make sweeping changes with very little public notice or much of a debate at all. But this is definitely something that we're watching and very well could happen here in the next few days.
And so we're hoping that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past. Prior to this call, we were preparing for this, and we talked a little bit about the Edgar ramp. And Bryce, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. Ted, I know we've talked about it before as well. But it seems like with some of these new proposals, the Edgar ramp, for those who aren't familiar, is a system that was devised during Governor Edgar's administration, which started the payments off really low and then kind of underfunded our pensions and made the problem much worse. And then over time, the pension payments got higher and higher and got us into the situation where, at its maximum, we were paying 25% of our state budget to pensions. It appears that some of the new proposals, especially the one from Tara Costa Howard or Representative Kifowit, um, that there is a new funding schedule that is maybe eerily reminiscent of the Edgar ramp. Can we go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is part of the tactics being used to um, advertise this. So we're seeing a new funding schedule that is essentially going to backload these payments. It's going to offer in exchange for lower payments today that are actually flat. They're the same or even slightly below what we're currently paying in exchange for these benefit increases, adding more years onto the back of the pension ramp. So paying out through these massive contributions now to 2049. So it's adding 4 years of additional payments, where decades in the future, your children, grandchildren, people that are still choosing to remain in the state are going to be paying for these benefits in excess of $20 billion annually for 4 years on the back half. So those are some of the funding mechanisms we're seeing here.
Yeah, and Brian, if I can add something there.
Absolutely.
Um, Yeah, so if the politicians were honest, if our Illinois lawmakers were honest, what they would do is they say we're going to raise the benefits, but we're gonna put all the cost into this year's budget, and then it would force massive tax hikes today, and then people would understand just how much these pension increases are worth. But they're not going to do that. What they're going to do, as Bryce said, is they're going to take this increased cost and like some mortgage, right? Push the payments as far away into the future as you can, and that way people today don't feel those costs. It'll be borne by our kids and by us later, maybe our grandkids because they're pushing it out so far. And so it's a really deceptive, devious way to increase these pension benefits because they get to make these promises to the government workers, which many of them are voting for these legislators. So they get the benefits of politically, and the unions get their benefits, but it's the taxpayers who are hoodwinked, and in the end, the payments to pay those debts will come in the future and push up taxes very, very high in the future.
So, Ted, if you could set your own path as to where we need to go from here, and I'll ask the same question of Bryce in a moment, but what should we be doing from here as a state? Should we be standing pat with tier two? Should we be talking about different pension reforms? How do we deal with the Social Security issue? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, so for me, they've got us discussing the wrong things. They've got the shiny object over here, which is let's talk about tier two pensions. And if you hear the arguments, they'll say that it's not fair that these new tier two workers who started after 2010 have lower benefits than those who are working who were hired before 2010 and have higher benefits. That's not fair. And so they've got us debating their pensions, but the real discussion should be how unfair pensions are relative to ordinary everyday Illinoisans who don't get such a thing. The average Social Security benefit right now is about 24,000 a year. So we saw the career teacher will get 80,000
To
pension
start,
to start, and then of course it grows at 3% yearly automatically every year after that. So what we've got a situation where we have to flip this discussion. Everyday Illinoisans need to be treated in the same way as, or said differently, our government workers shouldn't get special treatment. They shouldn't have something that ordinary people don't. And so what we do need to do, and I've been an advocate of this for a long, long time, is that we need defined contribution accounts, 401k style accounts for government workers, just like everyday Illinoisans have. And so, the first thing we could do right now that's constitutionally allowed is for all new workers starting tomorrow, they should have 401k style plans. That would be number one. Number two, then we should be working really hard to be able to amend the Constitution. That should be the real discussion so that we can amend the current pensions that are out there. If we don't do something about this over time, we're going to keep losing more and more people. Illinois will become, just an empty shell of itself, and we're headed in the wrong direction. So we need a constitutional amendment. And then, subject to that too is we can't have a state where the unions and the political class have all the power and everyday Illinoisans don't. We've got it upside down. The everyday Illinoisan is now subservient to their public servants. It's upside down. So, we really need to advocate for things to be flipped if we want this state to survive and if we want it to thrive. Because right now, everyday Illinoisans aren't thriving. As these taxes go up, as people leave, as home values suffer, we're not doing well now, and we need to actually, flip things because this is and can be and truly should be, one of the biggest, fastest growing states in the country. And right now, we're on the opposite end.
Thanks, Ted. Appreciate that. And kind of flipping the script over to Bryce, what do you think needs to be done in regards to the pension issue in the state of Illinois?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing is we can't afford to make any sort of changes right now to benefits. So, preserving the current structure of Tier Two is fundamentally important. It's very imperative because that's going to prevent the problem from being accelerated more so than what we currently have. So preserving tier two and only making changes that are deemed legally required in the future is going to be very important. And then moving forward, we have to then say, how do we deal with this 140 to potentially upwards of $300 billion pension debt that the state currently has? So pursuing a constitutional amendment absolutely necessary. We're not going to be able to pay our way out of this. We've seen what our current funding schedule has looked like. The amount that we're paying in to the system is woefully short of what actuaries say would actually be needed to pay down our pension debt on in a realistic timeline by 2045, like we're supposed to. So pursuing a constitutional amendment to allow for changes in tier one pension benefits is going to be really important. We did an analysis a few years ago now that looked at if we had passed if the reforms from 2013, similar reforms to what were passed in 2013, were upheld and implemented, what would that have looked like? And we would have been able to pay down our pension debt, take $50 billion worth of those liabilities off the table, and achieve 100% funding on the same timeline that we're currently pursuing at a much, much cheaper rate. So that those included things like increasing the retirement age, limiting how much of a tier one salary can be applied to pensions, and then matching a COLA to actual inflation rather than a guaranteed 3% every single year. So it was very minor changes that can be made at the time, but the longer we delay those, the more severe that's going to become. So pursuing constitutional amendment as soon as possible is vitally important as well, because the longer we delay, the more severe those changes could become, and ultimately, we've discussed a lot about how much and how generous these pensions benefits are for public sector pensioners, which is true while the state's still paying them. But if those systems go completely bankrupt and state finances become to where the state has struggle paying them, those benefits can be slashed. So there is a constitutional protection, but if the state doesn't have the money on hand to pay them and somebody can't pay them, what happens then? So it's not just an issue for taxpayers. It certainly is. They're the ones paying for this, but also for public sector pensioners. We have the most pension debt in the nation, the lowest funding ratios of any public sector pension systems in the nation as well. And that really is a giant threat to our public sector workers who have been told that this is a guarantee and it's always going to be there. But those funds are increasingly drying up. So pursuing constitutional pension reform is vitally important. And then I also agree with Ted, expanding the options that new workers can enroll in, pushing people into more 401k style systems would be beneficial not only for their retirement security and their portability. They'd be able to take that money with them when they change jobs. If they do so, they don't have to have long vesting requirements like current public sector employees do. But it would also eliminate the potential for these massive liabilities to accumulate, because those are defined contribution systems where the only guarantee is the money that's being put in, not the money that we're going to pay out in the future. So I think those are the three things that need to be done, most importantly, on the pension front here.
Thanks, Bryce. And go ahead,
Brian,
Ted.
if I can add something there, and I want to piggyback off of what Bryce said because it's so important. We've looked deeply at the Chicago pensions, and if you look at the police, the fire, the municipal funds, and if you look at how much money they actually have in the pension funds, they are dramatically short. the Chicago Police and Fire have about 4 years worth of payouts. In other words, they have so little money that if they didn't have money come in 4 years, they'd run out of money. That is the worst funded pensions in the country. So if you care about your policemen, if you care about your firemen, they run the big risk that those funds run out of money. Then Chicago has to start taking money out of its budget for schools, for roads, for public safety, daily public safety, to put into pensions. And you could have a situation where Chicago just becomes just a dramatic financial mess, and not just financial, but I think socially. And so, I think it's deeply unfair that our politicians, and I don't care who they are, whether it's Rahm Emanuel or Bruce Rauner or Lori Lightfoot or Brandon Johnson or Mike Madigan, they shouldn't be in control of our policemen's future retirement. It's been deeply unfair. It's bankrupt. Our politicians have lied to the policemen and firemen and city workers. And if COVID hadn't come around and bailed out the city and the states, God knows where Chicago would be today. And so, it really behooves us to actually put the control of retirements back into the workers' hands. Again, defined contribution plans would do that. As Bryce said, they're portable. The policeman owns that money, doesn't have to depend on a politician like Mike Madigan or somebody to make the payouts. We really need to empower our workers, and we just have to make sure that they're well funded, well structured plans so that our policemen and our firemen can feel comfortable in their retirements, but at the same time know that they're not relying on a corrupt, bankrupt political system for their future.
Well, I think that's really interesting. Could Ted, you're outlining exactly how does this impact people in the state of Illinois? And for the people that are joining us, thank you for staying on for 30 minutes up to this point, and please like and share this video to get more people involved. But really, the what I want to drive home is like this impacts every single area of your life, every single paycheck you have, every single purchase you make, your mortgage payment, the
Home
cost for
value.
this cost it pays for these pensions, and it's a big driver of why we have the highest state and local taxes combined in the nation. But it also impacts quality of life, your ability to get services. A lot of communities across the Chicagoland area have been cutting the number of policemen, the number of
Yeah.
firefighters. It's something that has enormous impacts on the state, and it's one of the reasons why we're frankly, one of the least competitive states when it comes to taxes, when it comes to business environment, when it comes to the quality of our services. And so it's an enormously important issue. And thanks to organizations like Wirepoints, like Illinois Policy, for highlighting this. Bryce, can you tell us a little bit more about Illinois Policy, how people can connect with you and get engaged in an issue like this?
Or IllinoisPolicy.org is the website, and at Illinois Policy on any form of social media. You mentioned we have a pretty large presence there. We're constantly updating our audience there on whether it be Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it nowadays, and Facebook, of course. But you can follow us on all those channels. You can join. We have a daily newsletter that we send out with current events and original research featured there, as well as weekly products that you can sign up for to stay up to date, whichever is most convenient for you. I would encourage anybody on this call interested in these issues to sign up there. And then when things are happening in Springfield, when things are happening in the city of Chicago, that constituents need to be made aware of and are very timely. We also send out calls to action then based around those events, so you can stay up to date, make sure you don't miss anything if you connect with us there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that both Illinois Policy and Wirepoints have their daily newsletters, which religiously read every single day. But Ted, tell us a little bit more about what Wirepoints does.
I will do that. I just want to bring up one more point that I forgot that's very important. It touches back on what you said, if I may. Um, when you think about these local governments, as these pension debts get bigger and bigger, these cities like a Danville, like an East St. Louis in the past, and other cities, they're being forced. Do they have enough money to pay their active policemen and at the same time pay the pensions for their retired policemen. And they're being trapped. And so because pensions are a priority under the Constitution, they're going to have to pay those first. And therefore, they're going to have to lay off policemen or firemen, and that's creating a real quandary. And it's forced a city like Danville, and I think it's Peoria as well, for example, to create new taxes just to fund pensions. So not only do you have your property taxes and your other types of taxes, they're creating pension taxes. It's a mess. So one of the solutions we need to have for governments to be able to negotiate with the unions is we need local bankruptcy. We should have municipal bankruptcy as a potential so that a Chicago can sit down and say, hey, we're going to negotiate with all our unions and our debt holders, and everybody who we owe money to come up with a plan. Because right now, Chicago can't negotiate. It's stuck paying bigger and bigger bills. So municipal bankruptcy is key. Second point I wanted to make is I too worked for Illinois Policy Institute for 6 years, and so I also am very fond of IPI and all its work it does. Third thing is Wirepoints. Every day we wake up and we try to look at what's happening in the markets in Illinois. And what we like to do is dig deep into the government documents to say, I'm hearing Governor Pritzker say this, or I hear Brandon Johnson say that, and most of the time it's not true. We'll go out and get the real data, whether it's the education data, the crime data, the property tax data, and we'll expose what's really happening. And we love to be data centric. We like to make a claim and then back it up with data. And so if you're looking for proof about the truth in Illinois, we're one of those sources. And so follow us at wirepoints.org, sign up for our newsletter, and of course we're on social at Wirepoints. But we're hungry to get our message out. And what we love is when people take our graphics, our data, and share them around, because that's maybe the most persuasive way to argue something is with the facts.
Thank you so much, Ted. I know we had some questions in the audience. So one from Peter Burchard. I think we've covered a lot of it, but he says to some extent, I think we should focus on how Illinois as a state where special interests run the show and not how to pay down this debt. I appreciate any comment about this. Does anyone have a thought about that and how we have like these special interests running the show? Ted, you've touched a little bit on this topic about a one-party state and how things have kind of gone terribly bad, where the state is run not for the people, but for the people, the public servants. It's kind of flipped. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the good ways of capturing the essence of this is look how many units of government we have. We have the most units of government in the country by far. And I argue that, I love local government. I like school districts. I like having things local. But Illinois doesn't do it because it wants to be. It doesn't have the most units of government because it wants to be local. It has the most units of government because it wants more government, more control, more bureaucrats, more pensions. And if you look at just like school districts, for example, that's often 60 to 70% of your school bill. Well, a big reason for that is we have 850 school districts in the entire state. A state like Florida only has 67, about 70. So we have fat, and this is the problem. And to preserve all that, that's why we have a constitutional protection for pensions. That's why we now have Amendment 1. They've created a political, legal environment where they have all the power and ordinary people don't. And that's really the point that we have, is that we as a people have lost our power. And it's going to be really hard to regain because of everything's been codified into law or into the Constitution. So, I would argue that our biggest challenge, but our biggest opportunity, is to push back against that, because we have to regain our power. Otherwise, we'll just keep losing people to other states because they will go to where they're more free. And we've seen already losing people to Florida, Tennessee, Texas. We can't afford that. So I think we need to be champions for ourselves, not because we don't like our public sector workers. We need great public sector workers. We need a really well-functioning public service. But it can't be done that it's to the point where we are subservient to the public servant class.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bryce, any last words on what you're seeing with the pension issue and the future of the state of Illinois?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to address that last question again also. We have some colleagues that track essentially how much of the public sector and union dues get spent on representing members versus how much is spent on politics. And the overwhelming majority of union dues are spent on politics, not on the local level for your teacher or your policeman, representing them like the union is supposed to do. The vast majority goes to politics because there is such a large vested interest in maintaining a structure like these generous pension benefits and making sure that no potential changes happen because there's a large financial incentive to do so. So part of this point that Peter's making, and we're working on it now, is just driving that messaging home, highlighting exactly how much is spent on employees and representing employees and members versus how much is spent on politics and some of the policies that are really driving up high tax burdens, high property taxes, and bankrupting the state and our cities. So just wanted to touch on that there. And then, the next final days will be this 10-day stretch here. We'll be watching the state budget very diligently to see, what's included on the pension front, any potential changes. We'll be lobbying very hard for people to get out and contact their lawmakers to not allow any sort of changes to be included in any sort of last minute legislation. Springfield likes to go up right until the 11th hour, sometimes beyond, to get their budgets passed. So we'll be very vigilant in what's happening in the state budget and any final legislation before the state adjourns. But like I said earlier, I anticipate something will be attempted at least. So it's going to be very important that we're vigilant about it, and very important that anybody viewing and constituents across the state reach out to their lawmakers and really turn up the pressure and make sure that none of these changes are passed.
Yeah, thank you, Bryce. And so for the people that are watching, again, Bryce is kind of hitting on it just now. What are the things that you can do? Obviously, if you have additional questions, feel free to put that in the body of the. We'll respond to it maybe after the meeting. But call those legislators, hold them accountable, let them know that this is an issue that you are concerned about, that that this is a really important time, and we can't be placing additional burdens on the people of Illinois for a system that is kind of fundamentally unfair and doesn't treat the citizens in the same way that the political class is treated. So give them phone calls in their Springfield offices right now. They'll be down there for the next 10 days or so. But this is also something that is going to be a battle that goes probably much further than just the next 10 days. It will be something that there might be a special session this year. We're starting to hear some rumors about that. There'll be a veto session. And then next year, we'll start the whole process all over again. So it's really important to hold our legislators accountable, both in between elections and elections. So give them phone calls, emails, handwritten letters, in-person meetings when they're back in the district. All these things are really important to make sure that the voice of the citizens are heard, not just the voices of the special interests. So with that, I wanted to thank Bryce and the Illinois Policy Institute and Ted at Wirepoints. The things that you guys do to educate and inform the people of Illinois is spectacular. Thank you so much for what you do. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon again about this issue and others. So thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and we'll hear from you again soon.
And thank you, Brian. And thanks, AFP.
Yeah, thank you guys very much.